Geek Out! And joining us for this special episode, we have Matt Hawkins. He's the writer on a lot of Image Comics series, Think Tank, Eden's Fall, The Tithe. He's also the chief operating officer of Top Cow, and he's here to talk about the latest projects that the publisher has got going on right now. Matt, thanks for coming on the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys. I'm a huge podcast listener and fan, and have dabbled with recording my own, but hate the way I sound, so I gave up on that, so I just try to leech off of you guys and do stuff like this.
That's why I only record. I never listen to our episodes back.
Oh, do you never listen to them?
I do. I basically do the quality control.
Yeah. This is Chris. I personally don't. But Sam listens back to pretty much everything we record.
Yeah. Even the crappy movie commentaries we used to do back when we were like riff tracks level.
3 a.m.
Yeah. It's like
living off 7-Eleven Slurpees.
Yeah. What are our thoughts on Megaforce? Okay, cool.
That sounds
Why
fun.
are we still watching Waterworld?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, you've got the big thing is that you guys have fresh off the heels. I think this is the third Top Cow Kickstarter. You guys did Cyberforce a couple years back. And if my memory serves, all of your Kickstarter campaigns have been successfully funded, and you've got another one going on with Golgotha right now.
Yeah, Cyberforce was actually, believe it or not, in 2011. So that was almost 7 years ago at this point. 6 years ago. And when I look back at that, I too thought it was 2 years ago until I went back and looked at it. I'm like, oh, that's 6 fucking years ago. That's crazy. That's like, when you start getting into your 40s, time sort of goes into an accelerated mode and everything seems to go very quickly.
Everything compresses.
Yeah, we did Cyberforce, which was successful. We did September Morning, which was successful as well, a kind of a different thing. Golgotha is kind of the first of a new type of crowdfunding kind of idea project that we're doing. This was a book that I did, that I wrote with Brian Hill, the team that sort of came up with Postal, and hired a Japanese-American artist, Yuki Saki, who I'm a big fan of her work, and I always wanted to work with her and pitched her this sort of sci-fi idea. And the best way I could say is if you like the original Alien, if you like Apocalypse Now, I think you'll dig this. It's got a lot of that vibe to it. There are actually no aliens in it. There's some alien technology. But the basic story is about this guy who realizes that his life on Earth sucks and he needs to start over. He's really looking forward to going to this new world and starting anew. And if you're going to travel to another world, it's 88 years transit time, and you realize that everyone you know on Earth will be dead by the time that you get there. So you really are starting completely from scratch. So this guy was looking forward to this. He signs up for this mission. He goes, and what happens is a few years after they leave, technology advances to a point where by the time they get there, the colony, the people that left after them got there before them, and there's been a colony here for 30 years, and they knew that this Golgotha ship was going to arrive. They don't even want them anymore. They don't want them there. They've been sort of dreading the fact that this group is going to show up, and he finds out when he gets there that this colony is not only is this colony already there, he's not going to run it, and he's not very happy about that. And then it gets into some kind of a bit of a weird mystery regarding sort of an alien technology. And I'm a huge Michael Crichton fan and an Arthur C. Clarke fan, and read all that stuff when I was growing up. So that's the kind of sci-fi I like. I like the, it's less spectacle and more kind of psychological, And I think that's kind of where Brian Hill and I both sort of reside. I think it's why he and I gel so well as writers together. But and what I meant by the Kickstarter itself was, this book is done. Most people, when they do like a Kickstarter or an Indiegogo, they come on and the idea is to try to raise money so that they can do something. We're doing something a little different, and I'm kind of following really Brian Pulido and Jimmy Palmiotti's lead, because they've been doing this now for a couple of years. And where you have a book and you kind of use Kickstarter really as kind of a distribution mechanism, less sort of hey, help me make my project work, because, the book's done, we're going to publish it regardless, and we make it sort of reasonably priced because it's a 128-page graphic novel. You can buy the digital download version of it, a PDF or a CBZ DRM free for $10. And, and then there's the print book's a little more expensive, plus you got to get it shipped. And so it's just, it's my wife is a classic example of someone who does not go to comic stores unless I drag her there. But she buys tons of stuff on Kickstarter. I mean, I see stuff coming in all the time. I'm like, what is this? And a lot of her is technology stuff. But so there's a lot of people that are buying and doing stuff on this platform that wouldn't traditionally go into a comic store or a bookstore and would never have seen this. So that's kind of the idea of it. I think original graphic novels are a hard sell in the comic book direct market. I mean, I don't know if you guys know the numbers these days, but there's 2,000 comic books being published a month. There's probably 200 to 300 trade paperbacks that are being released into the stores a month. Mm-hmm. So, once you get past Marvel, DC, the big name Image guys and the licensing stuff, there's not a lot of room for anything else. And so slogging it out, with these things, it's always an uphill battle. And when we did something like this, which was a complete original graphic novel, and I did it that way sort of from the get-go, because I wanted to do a little bit more of a slow burn. When you do a number one of a comic that is a comic, and it's kind of and you got to grab everyone's attention. You got to do that cliffhanger ending, and people are like, oh, fuck, what's going to happen next? That's a completely different thing than like really writing a movie or telling a story like that. I mean, you have some twists and turns, but you build a little more tension to the point where, and when you're dealing a little more with psychological sort of terror and stuff like that, I think that sort of slow burn tension works better. But you can't do it in comics because, like with a 32-page comic, you do 22 pages of art. By the time you do almost all setup and you're at the end of the issue, people are bored with it. I mean, they're like, because there's 30 days before there's another book coming out, or 6 weeks or whatever it is. So, but when you have the whole story and you can just sit down and read it in 3 or 4 hours, I think it works better that way. So this is a conscious choice and a decision. It was always intended to be a graphic novel. The Kickstarter came a little later when we were trying to figure out how to get more attention in the direct market, and I realized that we have difficulty getting attention for some of our bigger titles. So something that's completely original by I like Yuki's work a lot, but she's not a well-known artist, Mm-hmm. So we knew we were going to have an uphill battle, so we tried something different. That's really why we did it.
Well, you mentioned that this is a bit more grounded sci-fi, very more in the vein of like Arthur C. Clarke, like you were mentioning, Isaac Asimov. For our listeners at home, you actually you come from a science background, and you can definitely see that and say, certainly like Think Tank and Symmetry. How, I mean, this is kind of a big question. How did you make the jump from a master of science and physics to go, running one of the big longest running imprints for Image?
I was at UCLA. I was working a retail bank job in 1993. I was working on my master's. I'd finished my undergrad in 91. I was accepted into the master's program, and I was there working. I've always been people don't seem to understand a lot of what it means to be physics. They always assume it's Big Bang Theory. I was very much on the applied science side of it, engineering and building and crafting. I wanted to go into military aerospace design and build shit that would kill people for fun, and because that's what my dad did. Yeah. My dad is an engineer and was a missile man and worked for the Air Force for 30 years. He worked on a project called the ICBM missile train. He was one of the guys in the missile silos that turned the keys. He had a hell of a career post sort of Vietnam. And so I grew up on military bases, and I was sort of following in his footsteps. My sister went to Annapolis and then went on to be an astro engineer and did aerospace and physics and all kinds of crazy stuff too. So I'm going sort of in the family vein for the most part, and I get into college, and you kind of I had done a few internships at some banks. I'd done some stuff at Raytheon, Lockheed, but I was working at a Norwest Financial, which is a retail banking service that Wells Fargo bought about a decade ago, and this was 92, 93. And I got to tell you, I don't know if you guys have ever done jobs like that, but retail banking fucking sucks. And it sucks. I mean, it taught me so much about how things I did not want to do in life. And, because it was a lot of sales. It was dealing with people. It was dealing with people that didn't want to talk to me, a lot of cold calling. And oh my God, I fucking hated it. I hated going to work every day. And, I didn't really want to do the school loan thing. I had some scholarships, but I was working full time to pay my way through school. And I was working on the master's program. So my life was pretty much, I was in the lab, I was working, in classes, I was at the job, and that was all I was pretty much doing. And my nephew, who was 13 years younger than me, called me one day and said, hey, can you take me to this thing in Anaheim, this Mile High Comics signing that Rob Liefeld is doing? I'm like, Mile High what? Rob who? And he's like, oh, you don't know who Rob Liefeld is? And I'm like, no. And he's like, oh, no, he's this guy. And so, it's all pre-internet. So he's telling me about the commercial. He couldn't send me a YouTube link because there was no YouTube. So he's telling me on the phone about all this stuff. And I finally said, all right, I'll take you. So I picked him up on that Saturday. I think it was a Saturday. And I took him to the signing. And he kept saying, the signing's at 12. We need to get there at like 9 a.m. I'm like, yeah, fuck that. We'll get there at 12. And I had no clue. So we get there at 12, and we waited in line for like 4 hours. It was at the heyday of Image. This is April 93, I think it was. The craziest thing happened. I was standing in this long line. I knew nothing about comics. And Jonathan Sabal, who is now an inker for DC Comics, was one of the original Extreme Studios inkers from 93 to 97, was standing in line in front of me for the entire time I was in this line. And so when you're in a line for that long, you chat with people. And he was just, I was listening to him and another guy talk about the comic industry, how cool Image Comics was, how much fun it was. They just seemed so excited. He had a portfolio. And so by the time we got up to the front, I was sort of semi-educated because I literally was just standing there for 3 hours. And then John shows his portfolio to Rob Liefeld, and he's the guy right in front of me. And Rob looks through John's portfolio and says, hey, dude, you're awesome. You're hired right now. Jump over the table and hang out with us. And John's like giddy, like he's a 20-year-old kid. He's like screaming, and he jumps over the table, and he's like bouncing around, introducing himself to everybody. And I'm the next guy in line. And I look, and I realize, here are these 10 young, good-looking guys. It was, it was Mark. I mean, it was Richard Ory. It was Eric Stevenson, the publisher of Image, was one of the guys. Dan Frega, Murat Michaels, Dan Panosian, and I'm trying to remember who else was there. And there were 2 or 3 really cute girls back there with them, and they were all wearing these black Extreme Studios jackets, and they just looked like they were fucking rock stars. And I'm like, God damn, my life really sucks, and these guys look like they're having a really good time. And it was just one of those weird cosmic kismet, the universe opens a door for you. Do you take a chance and step through it or not? And because I was the next guy, and suddenly I'm staring Rob Liefeld in the face, 22, 23-year-old Rob Liefeld, and I said, hey, I don't know anything about comics, but are you looking for anybody to do any administrative or anything else? And he's like, I really need someone that can write press releases and do some letters pages. Can you do that? And I'm like, yeah, of course. And I had no fucking idea what that even meant. And so I vividly remember going to Borders, I think it was, and buying and sort of skimming through there and finding a book on how to write a press release. And I bought it. I went home and I wrote a press release that night about the signing event that happened that day. And then I faxed it to them the next day at their office because they gave me their card. And I faxed it to Eric Stevenson, actually. And I said, look, this is the press release I would have sent for the event in advance of you doing it. I would have sent it to all the local media, et cetera, et cetera. And then so Eric gave me a call and said, hey, Rob wants you to come down today. And I'm like, this is the next day. And I'm like, okay. And I was on my lunch shift. I worked at a bank, which if you work at a bank, you got to wear a fucking suit, Yeah. So I jam over to Extreme. And it's my lunch shift. I'm sitting in the lobby realizing I'm wearing a suit, and I see all these guys running around in shorts and tank tops, and and I'm just like, wow, I must look like a tool. And Rob left, and he said he did this kind of to fuck with me a little bit. And Rob and I are friends now, but it was very different back then. And so they left me in the lobby for hours. Yeah. I mean, and I was on my lunch shift for my regular job. I mean, I almost left multiple times, and then finally, after about 2.5, 3, it's one of those things that was probably 90 minutes, but it seems like it was 4 hours, because I remember I was late going back to work, and I made up a story. But I get into, Rob finally drags me into an office and says, hey, we really like you, we want to hire you. How much do you need to make? And I'm like, wait, what? I'd been through the interview processes at UCLA where they teach you how to interview and stuff like that and go on professional interviews. And I'd actually interviewed for some of the internships I'd done at Rockwell, Lockheed, and Raytheon. And these are very professional government sort of subsidiary, like military industrial complex. They're very professional in the way they do things. You know what I mean? So I was not expecting that. And I remember at the time, I think I was making $30,000 working at the bank, which in 92 was not bad, And I said, I make $50 on my day job. If I have to quit, then I need to make at least that. And then Rob looks at me and he says, oh, okay, cool. We'll start you at that. And he had no idea. And I've talked, Rob and I are friendly now, and those guys had no concept of what it was to pay people, because he had made $20 million that year.
Yeah.
You know what do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
I mean,
Youngblood, sure.
So for me to say I needed to make $50,000, he's like, oh, okay, sure. And I learned later that when he was working with Hank Canals, and basically he gave me the spot that he and Hank Canals kind of split. And he was paying Hank $5,000 a week, I think it was. So, I was certainly a downgrade in cost. But so honestly, that's how I got into the industry. And whenever I share this story, it always annoys someone, because I was not even really a comic fan. You know what I mean?
Yeah. That's an amazing story. That's like the craziest shit ever.
It's every time I tell the story, it just kind of amazes me, because everyone has their own sort of unique breaking into the comic industry story, but mine's pretty fucking out there. You know what I mean? I mean, it's just, imagine if any of 50 different things didn't happen. What if I had some massive report due the next day and I couldn't take my nephew? Or I've thought about that. I wouldn't have known my ex-wife. I wouldn't have had these 2 kids that live with me. I wouldn't have met my second wife, and I wouldn't be living in Los Angeles most likely. I'd probably be living in Virginia, because that's where all the DARPA labs are at. So there's all these things that I realized my life took a very strong turn, and I don't regret it, not one iota. I would not change a thing in the world. I get to tell you, I absolutely fucking love my life. I love the job I do, and I have more freedom to do creatively what I want. That I think I probably have one of the best jobs in the comic industry, because I literally can do anything I want.
Yeah. I mean, that with Top Cow, you even kind of have autonomy from Image. You basically run the label and everything. I do have to say, as an aside, Jake and I are Army brats. Chris is a Marine brat. Our fathers work DOD. And we live right outside DC. So we know that entire kind of life.
We know that feel.
Yeah. No, and my son's 16 now and wants to go in the Navy, and I'm trying to help him with that. And so it's interesting, I mean, there was a version of my life that was completely different. So
sliding doors, man, sliding doors. So with that in mind, with the studying for applied sciences and looking into the military industrial complex, I guess now that you put that context in there, that means that Think Tank comes from a really personal place.
It does, and it's that character David Lauren is a combination of myself, another guy I know who is way smarter than me, and who's still in that, and another, and kind of a little bit of my dad, and so I sort of lived a weird life, and when you live through the Cold War, I don't know how old you guys are, but I was alive in the 70s and the 80s when the Cold War was real and it was scary, and I remember drop and roll, and I was smart enough to realize that drop and roll against the nuke is pretty fucking stupid. I remember thinking that as like a 10-year-old kid. I'm like, you want me to drop on the ground and roll under the desk? It's a nuclear warhead. This is going to do nothing. Yeah. And I even said that to my teacher, and I would get in trouble for stuff like that, for popping off to my teachers with trying to give them, logic. No, I got to tell you, I have a tremendous respect for the military and the DOD, and Think Tank comes from a place of kind of dual purposing of science, and so many things. Like one of my roommates in college has Asperger's, and it's also why I think the character Mark from Postal probably feels so real to people on the spectrum, is because I lived with that guy, and I knew exactly his sort of OCD and interesting social quirks, and I kind of studied him before there was really, this was, like I said, this was in the 90s, early 90s, and there wasn't as much knowledge of Asperger's and autism and these sort of things, and now, and I think when you realize you're in the sciences, everyone's on the spectrum a little bit, I've always been, a little dyslexic, where every time I go to a hotel, I take a photo of the room I'm staying in, because I always will go to 508 instead of 580. That happens to me so often that it just frustrates the shit out of me. But it only happens when I'm kind of half paying attention. I think people misunderstand autism and Asperger's. None of my children, I think, have any issues with this, so I'm not one of these parents that are obsessed with it. I just have known so many of these people in my lifetime, and there's so many of them that are building all these things that are this technology that affords us this luxury of this lifestyle that we lead.
Well, I mean, to take it to Think Tank again, you guys are in the middle of the I believe 5th arc. At the end, spoilers for anyone who hasn't kept up with Think Tank, but David's the 4th arc sees David in a very, very dark place. He tries to kill himself, and so what was your kind of, and honestly, I mean, you were mentioning Cold War stuff. I feel like a lot of the stuff in this arc of Think Tank is very prescient in terms of what's going on with the relations with the Russian Federation and everything these days.
Yeah.
What were some of your inspirations and stuff going in, taking David from his personal low point, and then of course on the geopolitical arena?
Well, the geopolitics and the tech, I mean, the thing with Think Tank, and it's probably my favorite book that I do, and I'll just be clear up front, it's the worst selling book I do, because I think it has a smaller audience. I've been told repeatedly that it would sell better as a novel, so I'm actually writing a novel for Think Tank now, a newer, kind of a different take where he's 14 and it's set in the present. But, in Think Tank, there's a technology story, there's a geopolitical story, and then there's always a character-based relationship story, and those three all coalesce into what's going on. And the nice thing about what I write is I'm able to read these science journals, you know what I mean? And I read a lot of political blogs, and a lot of this stuff about Russia I got from this book called The Next 100 Years, which I think was written by William Friedkin. And I read this a couple years ago, and the book itself predicted everything that's going on with Russia right now. And so I read that and sort of studied it, did a lot of research online, and sort of came up with my own take on how they might do that. I also discovered that the Russians were using crows for surveillance. And because I always, when I'm pitching this book to people at cons, I always say, look, if you were being followed around by a drone all day, you would notice it, and it would scare the shit out of you. However, if you just looked up and you saw a crow, you wouldn't think twice about it. And would you even notice if it was the same crow that was following you around all day? You wouldn't notice. And so if that's what the Russians are doing. And they've been adopting a lot of these older Cold War drops, because technology is fragile now. It's so easy to hack that they've started doing drops again. Like people are doing handwritten things with codes and doing drops. And it's really quite fascinating, sort of the low-tech, high-tech technology and espionage thing that's going on in the world right now. But I'm just fascinated with politics. I'm fascinated with geopolitics. I think a lot of what's going on in Russia right now is our fault. I think that people don't seem to understand the promises we made to Russia about NATO and that we violated. And by putting the Baltic states into NATO right on their fucking border after we promised them we would not do that. And we promised that to them in writing. And, there's just been multiple times where we've just done these things and just completely fucked over these other countries. But because we're the U.S. of A., we beat our chests and we don't tell anyone what we actually did. And then we talk about the bad things that Russia's doing. And suddenly everyone's like, fuck Russia.
Well, that's why that's why Russia invaded, Georgia in 2008?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, we were threatening to add Georgia and the Ukraine to NATO, I mean, we've sort of have given them a loose background, but in effect, I mean, NATO was a real thing, I mean, for a long period of time, and it was part of that whole Cold War where if you attacked any member of this NATO alliance, you were attacking every member of this NATO alliance, and there would be repercussions. And, I always say to people, I'm like, look, how would you feel if there were fucking nuclear weapons pointed at us on the Canadian border? Facing us. How would you feel about that? How would you feel if there were giant, Russian aircraft carriers right off the coast of California? Yeah. And just cruising up and down, and planes flying 50 miles outside, bombers and shit like this. And I said, how would you feel about that? And people were like, wow, that would suck. I said, we do that to these people every fucking day.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm a patriot, believe me. I'm no. I'm all for American domination. But
it's a very it is a very complicated thing, though. I mean, that's why we staged the Bay of Pigs, right? So we wouldn't have nuclear weapons on our doorstep.
Correct.
And that's so it's really interesting, looking at Think Tank and looking at Samaritan too, where it's much more domestic, spinning out of Eden's Fall and all that, where you're seeing kind of in Samaritan, for anyone who didn't read Eden's Fall, you're seeing the kind of the religious ideologues in office, and in Think Tank, you're seeing the Russian-Estonian or just the Baltic tension hit an all-time high. And I'm just like reading these books because I don't know if you remember, Matt, but I actually interviewed you for Image Plus a couple months ago on Samaritan. That's how I know about
cool.
that book. But
very cool, yeah.
And then we talked at Emerald City Comic Con. That's how this all kind of snowballed into taking place. But reading both Samaritan and Think Tank, it's like, Jesus Christ, like this stuff is like this. I feel like I'm reading like a Tom Clancy nonfiction at certain times,
Well, that's what I'm trying to do, because Marvel and DC own the spandex set, so there's really, in my opinion, not any point in competing with that. So I'm trying to do something different. I think there is a large space in the industry for growth in areas of romance and erotica comics, like what we're doing with Cedric and Sunstone, and a book that I'm doing with his wife called Swing, about a couple that goes swinging. And I got to tell you, that might seem foreign to me, but that's the hardest fucking thing I've ever had to write. Because I got to tell you, it's actually, for me, really easy to write shit with bombs and jets flying around and making that interesting. But it's really hard to make a couple in a relationship problem interesting. I rewrote that thing more times and had just, oh my God. But I learned so much, I got to tell you.
Dare I ask, what was the research for Swing like?
Don't ask my wife. No, it's you know what it was? If you know Sunstone, it's Stjepan Cedric's book on a couple. It's two women that fall in love, and they have sort of an S&M relationship, but it's treated in a sex-positive way. Most of the readers of that book are women, and people that are into S&M culture and play and practice that stuff, they like this book, and they don't like 50 Shades of Grey. If you talk to actual people that participate in S&M, and I actually do not, but I know the Cedrics do, and I know several people that do, they talk about how S&M is very sex positive. It's not, and they look at 50 Shades of Grey as being very rapey, in terms of how it's being portrayed. And I've seen the movies, so I tend to kind of agree with that. But Swinging came about. Swing, the book came about because I started doing a little research on sex subcultures, and I realized that for every one S&M club there's like 5 swinging clubs, so in the United States, and so there's a huge underground sort of swinging culture in this country. There's estimates that it's probably close to 2 million people, that probably do it at least once annually with other couples willingly and kind of thing, or at least threesomes. I mean, threesomes with a girl is also considered to be swinging, and that's actually pretty common. So there's, and again, if you can create content for these people that's not stupid, complete softcore porn, or something that looks at their subculture in a negative way, they'll embrace it like you would not believe. I mean, if you look at Sunstone Volume 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and look at erotica fiction on Amazon, they are the top 5 in the category, and they have been for 2 years. I mean, we have sold hundreds and hundreds of thousands of volumes of Sunstone. I mean,
and you guys are about to do a hardcover for it, right?
Do what?
You guys are about to do like a deluxe hardcover for Sunstone too, right?
Yeah, Sunstone Volume 2 hardcover. Sunstone Volume 1 hardcover, I think, came out just last week, 2 weeks ago. Yes. It's very, very recent. It's the first 3 volumes, and the Volume 4 and 5 comes out as Sunstone hardcover Volume 2. They're actually the same length because Volume 4 and 5 he did a much higher page count. So they're actually the exact same size, even though the first one's 3 volumes and the second one is 2 volumes. So, and that's and again, like I talk about Think Tank, I mean, Think Tank is my worst-selling book in the 32-page comic market. I've actually thought many times about just converting straight to trade paperback or graphic novel first and just going that route like Cedric did with Sunstone and like we're doing with Swing and some of these other books. The problem is it's expensive to do. If I'm paying an artist a couple $100 a page to do, full art, 20 pages is $4,000 an issue plus printing. I even if I'm losing a little bit of money on the 32-page book, I'm recouping some of the cost on the creative. Versus if I go to a graphic novel, and let's say you do a 128-page graphic novel with 96 pages of story and art, you got 96 times 400, which is what, $30,000? I don't. The quick math's not coming to me right now. I'm tired. But so recouping $4,000 versus $30,000, it's a much bigger outlay, and there's a lot larger risk. Having said that, I'm selling about 5,000 copies of these 32-page books for Think Tank, but I'm selling 15 to 25,000 copies of the trades over 5 years. I'm in my third printing of Think Tank Volume 1, and so that's where I get happy, because talking to Diamond, they tell me that 20% of trades ever get a second printing, and less than 5% ever get a third printing. So that makes me feel good.
Nice. Now, Think Tank also ties in with, Postal, with the Tithe. They all kind of have the jam session that is Eden's Fall, and now the Tithe basically becomes Samaritan following Sam's adventures. What was it that made you wanted to build kind of a shared universe within Top Cow?
It happened, this happened actually completely organically. I mean, the Tithe Volume 1 initially was not, and there's nothing in Tithe Volume 1 that would indicate that it's in a shared universe with Think Tank or Postal. When I did Tithe Volume 2, there was a point where Sam wanted to talk to a Department of Defense hacker, and they needed some sort of communication with the government to move the plot forward. And I'm like, well, I could just create a new one, or it'd be fun just to do a cameo with David Lauren. And I did a cameo with David Lauren in the book, and that was the first time we had done anything like that. And originally, at the end of Tithe Volume 2, the guy that ultimately went to Eden, the bad guy, I was just going to kill him at the end of Tithe Volume 2. We were just going to have him killed, and that'd be the end of the story. But after that cameo, Brian Hill and I had started talking. And actually, if you look at Volume 1 and Volume 2 of Postal, there's also nothing in Volume 1 or Volume 2 of Postal that would indicate that there's a shared universe either. But when we got to the end of Tithe 2, and Brian was talking about what he was going to do with Postal Volume 3, I just said, hey, what would be fun? It's what if we did this? And what if at the end of this Tithe Volume 2, instead of let's just killing off the bad guy, let's send him to Eden, and then we'll sort of integrate this thing, and maybe we can do just 3-issue thing, and it'll be fun. And it came from a place of story, which is where I think crossovers work. And a lot of the Marvel crossovers that I've read of the past seem to come from that, I'm talking like the 70s and 80s, where you read some of their storylines where they're integrated. They seem to happen organically. I think a lot of their crossovers in the last couple decades, both companies feel very forced, and they're these massive, epic 80 parts with all the extended thing. And I just, whenever they do that kind of stuff, I honestly kind of tune out. I don't read any of it, because I'm like, it's just there's just so much information and stuff going on. I'm like, I just kind of tune out. I know a lot of people love that stuff, and great. But I wanted to do something small and self-contained, so we agreed to do this 3-issue thing. And then once we'd done it, it was kind of fun. And I know Brian has used a few references, excuse me, in Postal, and I've definitely done in Samaritan, because Mirasway and David Lauren both appear in Samaritan, even the first issue. And are vital parts of that storyline. So it's just nice to have these characters sort of roll back and forth. And it sort of works, because there's no supernatural, there's no superheroes, it's the real world. It's heightened. We've already had war with China and war with Russia and China in Think Tank. And, and that's in less than 5 years, so it certainly needs to be heightened and sensationalized, but it's not, it's all plausible. See, the one thing that I try to do with this world is I try to keep everything plausible. And Swing, Sunstone, and another book we're doing also take place in sort of the same universe. So I'm kind of when you do it in these sort of organic ways that are fun, I think the readers follow along. I like to do things in threes. And like Swing, Postal, Swing, Sunstone, and Linda's book Bloodstain all take place. And the only connection between those three books, and we may do a crossover eventually, but the only real connection is they all play like a World of Warcraft type game together, and they're a raiding guild, and that's how they know each other. They've never met each other in person, but in all the stories you'll see the characters go in and they'll play these online video games, and they'll have this group where they're playing, and which is just kind of fun. And that's the connection between those characters, And then if we ever did decide and needed some sort of fun reason to put them together, we could do it and do guest stars. And it's the same thing with the Top Cow universe. Darkness and Witchblade and Fathom and Tomb Raider, and all those characters took place in the same sort of shared universe. And then Mark and I did it with Aphrodite 9 and Cyberforce. When we brought those back in 2009, 10, and 11. And we're actually going to do that again. That's not really been announced yet, but the end of this year is the 25th anniversary of Cyberforce, and Mark and I are launching a new Cyberforce title.
Nice.
So you guys have an exclusive.
Yes.
You guys already brought back, or it's if not, it's coming soon. Magdalene came back, right?
Yeah, the first issue of Magdalena came out a couple weeks, 3 weeks ago, and second issue I think comes out in a week or two, and that's Teenie Howard, Ryan Cady, and Chris Tabari. One of the things that makes me proud of Teenie Howard and guys like Isaac Goodhart, who is the artist on Postal, is they all came from the Top Cow Talent Hunt. You know, their first work and their introduction to the comic book industry was through this little talent hunt we did that picked some winners and gave them an opportunity. And now Teenie's writing books for everyone. You know, she's doing work for DC, and so it's fun to watch her sort of ascend. And you know, Isaac is being recruited by everyone now, but he's done 20 issues of Postal.
Well, you know, we've had Zach Kaplan on the show a couple times to talk Eclipse. Was that kind of a talent hunt for Zach as well?
No, his was unique, and I try to explain to him how fortunate he is actually, because and he knows this. He may not say this publicly. I've said it a few times, and I know it doesn't embarrass him because the book is really good, and I think he's proven himself. And we're doing another book with him now. But you know, I gave him a shot on that book as a favor to his manager, who I owed a favor. And I had called out he's represented by a management firm called Heroes and Villains, and they're good guys, and I've known them for a long time. And there's a guy named Mikhail Mayfield who I've known for a really long time, and I just owed the dude a favor. And he called it in for Eclipse. And so you know, I looked at the book. I said, all right. I helped him find Giovanni Timpano, the artist on it, and I put that team together. And we started cranking on the book. I liked the core idea. You know, I have a soft spot in my heart for science, and Zach had done some research. And so I liked the book, but we don't do a lot of stuff like that, you know, because that's more the purview of Image. And I don't think Image would have picked up Eclipse, actually, because they tend to pick up stuff that's by better-known creators, you know?
Yeah. I mean... So it was like a Godfather-esque favor. He asked you on the day of his daughter's birthday.
Yeah, no, and that's the one thing I think that guys like Mark Silvestri and Rob Liefeld and some of these guys in the industry don't get enough credit for, and to a lesser extent me, because I've found some people too, but we've brought a lot of people into this industry, you know. I mean, Top Cow on the art side, the Silvestri, you know, Dave Finch, Mike Turner, Joe Benitez, Billy Tan, Kucha. You know, there's so many of these artists that have gone. I mean, Kenneth Rockefort, you know, Michael Broussard. I mean, there's so many artists that are these top names, and some of these guys have gone on to animation and other things, but these are top name artists in the field, and they didn't exist before Mark basically trained them. I mean, Dave, Joe, and Mike were Mark's background pencilers. You know, they basically sat in a studio with Mark for years before they ever published their own work, and they sort of were hand taught by him, you know. And I brought Zach in. There's artists like guys at Extreme when I was there, because I was at Extreme from April '93 to whenever, I don't remember when it happened, but Extreme folded, and then there was a brief interlude, and then we launched Awesome Comics. And I think there was only a couple months in there, and ironically, it was in that 2-month period of time, and I think it was '96 or '97 that I actually went back and considered going into science, because I had done, when Extreme folded the first time, it was kind of a heartbreak, you know. I mean, that was not happy times for me. But then Awesome started with Jeff Loeb, and Alan Moore was involved, and I got to talk to Alan Moore on the phone, which was fun. And so we did some books there, and then that company folded a year later, and I then did Lady Pendragon through Image Central for a year and a half. And then in April '98, I got a call from Brad Foxhoven, who was the president of Top Cow at the time, and wanted to know if I would take a job running their publishing division. And so I met with them, and I took the job, and what is that, 19 years? You know, I mean, what I didn't know is guys like Brad Foxhoven, David Wall, and a lot of the guys on the administrative side that brought me in, they were all leaving, but I didn't know that at the time. So I started at Top Cow as the vice president of publishing in April of '98, and I believe I was the president of the company by April of '99. And which is I always joke with Silvestri, because I've signed and handled all of his money now since April of '99, and signed every check for Top Cow, you know. And I just keep telling him, I'm like, you have no idea how much money I could rip you off for, and you wouldn't even know. I always tell him, I said, you're really fucking lucky I'm an honest man, you know, because I could siphon a couple $100,000 here and there over the years, and you never would have noticed. So.
Yeah, that's why that's why you kickstarted Cyberforce 7 years ago.
Oh yeah. No, things are different now. I mean, it really is weird sometimes because it really feels like a different job because now it's very much an incremental business. We're sort of building fans, and part of the reason I do so many signings and so many conventions, and I really hustle the circuit, is because guys, it's hard. I mean, I give you a case in point. I did the Dallas Fantasy Fair, not Dallas Fantasy Fair, Dallas Fan Expo a few weekends ago, and we sold 500 trade paperbacks in one weekend, 3 days, all books that I'd written. And out of curiosity, I emailed my guy over at Diamond, and I said, hey, can you just real quick look up these 9 codes, the books that I was selling there, and tell me how many copies of these books were sold in the state of Texas this year? And it was less than half. It's like 230 or something like that. And I was looking at that, and I'm like, God damn, man, I just hand sold 500 copies of my books in 3 days. And the entire state, which there's a lot of stores in Texas, it's one of the bigger retail states. It's the entire state didn't sell half. So that's why you got to hustle it. You got to get out there and build the audience. It's very incremental. I mean, the difference between now and then is in the 90s, you'd put a book out through Image or through what we were doing. It didn't matter who you were. It was people wanted it. Mm-hmm. My first issue of Lady Pendragon, I think, sold 700,000 copies.
Damn.
Those are like, my God. I mean, the industry these days?
No, I'm happy. Like I said, I sold about 5,000 copies of 5,000 copies of Think Tank. I mean, 5,000, 700,000, and I look at Think Tank and I'm like, fuck, this is such a better book than Lady Pendragon ever was, and it's on one level, it's a little frustrating, but it's a different business. I'm playing a longer game, I'm building these things. Every time you put out a new book, a new volume, there's a tail effect that sells the previous volumes. When you have a new volume of Think Tank Volume 5, the retailers then look on their sales sheet and say, okay, I'm going to order 2 copies of this. Oh, I have only 1 copy of Volume 2, so they'll order another one of Volumes 1, 2, 3, and 4. So every time you put out a new volume, you sell incrementally, and there's this tail effect on digital. It works on trades. It works in the book market. And so you just have to pursue these revenue sources and run it like a business, and that's one of the things that's kind of hard to explain to these super indie creators is you really have to run this like a business because many of these guys are just fans and they have no idea kind of what they're doing. They're gung-ho, they're excited, and they're doing a lot of stuff. And sometimes the books are good, not sometimes.
When we had Zach on, we had him on in advance of the debut of Eclipse, and we had him to promote Volume 1, the collection of Eclipse. And I was, one of the questions I asked him was like, so now that, you an arc deep and you're about to start the second one, what did you learn? He's like, I had no idea what stuff like FOC was before we launched the book, So there definitely is this kind of, there is a business. And have you noticed anything? I mean, you mentioned Cyberforce turns 25 this year. There obviously the Darkness and Witchblade have seen multimedia adaptations. I think Postal's in development. Is there any other, multimedia things that you can tease about or that you guys have in the works?
Well, we've always got stuff going on. I mean, part of that is, it's what's development and what's real. I mean, we have Witchblade at NBC. Whether that's going to go forward or not, we still don't know. But that's a network pilot. So that's always super iffy. You know what I mean? I mean, I think they actually greenlight 1 out of 4 of those. So we have a 25% chance, which is not a great odds. Versus like Postal, which is at Hulu, they don't play the game like that. They develop 90% of the stuff that they buy. And the way Hulu does it is they'll test things, like they'll shoot an episode or 2 or 3, and then they'll put it up on Hulu to see if anybody gives a shit and what the reaction is. And then if people like it, they'll do more. So these sort of Netflix, Hulu, sort of Amazon, these new models are very different. And I'm very bullish on Postal. I also have read the pilot script that Seth wrote, and it's really good. And I can't say that about a lot of stuff because I've read adaptations of my own work. I've read adaptations of The Darkness and Witchblade and stuff for years, and a lot of that stuff I read, and I'm like, oh my God, And not good. I'll just leave it at that. And the worst is when you spend a year working with these writers and developing and doing this thing, and then they go off into a room and write, and then you're just waiting with bated breath, and then you get sent this thing, and you realize the second you get it and you read it, it's dead. Because there's some network executive that's reading it too and saying, I don't get this, and they're moving on to, whatever else. So, we've got, I have a group developing The Tithe. It's not been optioned, but I have 2 writers and a producer that really like The Tithe. The first volume, not volumes 2 and everything else, but the first sort of core volume of that modern day Robin Hood was something that sparked with these guys. And there was a character in there, Dwayne Campbell, who I actually had a black actor call me and say, I want to thank you for creating characters with positive black character archetypes, because I think as we didn't even really think about it. I mean, we just kind of were doing it and developing it, and a lot of that is Rasan, because Rasan just kind of draws things. The character, the general from Think Tank, Diana Clarkson. I wrote that as a man. Rasan just changed the sex of the character when he did it, and I just saw it and I'm like, okay, who cares? It doesn't really matter to me. And then the crazy thing was, as the story evolved, I realized that part of the fact is she was kind of the bad guy, and I love the fact that it was this older woman who in effect was David Lauren 30 years earlier, but she was in the military when it wasn't cool for a woman to be in the military, so she became kind of a bad guy because of her circumstance. And David is kind of a misogynist, so his sort of underthinking her, or valuing what her opinion was, sort of I can't think of the word right now, but he didn't realize how smart she was, and sort of she took advantage of that to sort of outwit him, and underestimated. I'm sorry, sometimes I'm a little slow, but he underestimated her and paid the price for it, So sometimes things happen and you just kind of roll with it. I think that's the nice thing about Image and Top Cow especially is I shared the rights to all the stuff I create with the artists, So when Think Tank got optioned, and Think Tank's been optioned twice. It was an option as a film and it's been optioned as a TV series. I now have the rights back. Both those did not work out. And but we were paid both times for the options, and that's it's an extra check a year that you weren't really expecting. So, and see, that's the nice thing too, is we continue to option stuff like Rest, which was the book I did with Milo Ventimiglia 15 years ago. That book, I think we're about to sell again as a film, and so stuff happens where you build this library. I think people forget that Top Cow's been around for so long. I mean, we own 300 properties. Damn. Do you know what I mean? I mean, I could run down a list. There's No Honor, there's Berserker, there's Rising Stars, there's Midnight Nation. I mean, these are all probably things you vaguely remember. Yeah. There's Sunset, there was Christos Gage's book. There's all these projects that we put out as the miniseries that were collected, and there's just so many things. And these things get recycled. And what happens is people that grew up and they liked a book and they always liked it. And this happened with a project recently where we got a call. And this guy said, I read this thing 10 years ago, and I finally remembered what it was, and I really like this, and I'd like to develop this. Do you guys still have the rights to it? It's a property I hadn't even thought about in over a decade. And I'm like, sure. And we optioned it to him, and that's what lawyers and agents are for. But there's a business there, and, that's where you continue to build these properties, and you can monetize them in other revenue streams. The media sells books, ultimately. Media rights and other books. Like when we did Wanted and Witchblade and the Darkness video games, we sold a fuck ton of books during the sort of the release and the marketing phases of those things. I mean, when the second Darkness video game came out, wow, we sold a lot of books. It was kind of mesmerizing how many books we sold into the Amazon and the book trade. So those kind of events you need to be able to figure out and properly monetize, and take advantage of those. Because they happen. How often do they happen? A Boom had 2 guns. I think they have something new coming out like next year on the air or whatever. But there's a 5-year gap between there, Mm-hmm. And Boom's putting out 30 titles a month. Top Cow puts out like 3, So I kind of look at the opportunities and stuff like that, and we're continuing to pursue it. I'm pursuing it a lot less now than I used to. From 2008 to 2011, I was doing Hollywood stuff almost full time. And, I was meeting and trying to develop, and I did get some stuff going. Obviously we got Wanted going in the Darkness video games, but, that stuff it's a lot there's so many heartbreaks. You have no idea. And I've grown to hate the development process in Hollywood. It is really unnecessarily ridiculous.
I mean, we've had some creators on the show. You know, well, can we name names? Should we name names?
We've been doing it for years.
You know, we had Tim Seeley talking like hack slash, or we had, you know, John Layman talking chew. It's just a lot of hurry up and wait, and then it's a lot of we have no idea where in development this is right now. You know.
Well, it's not just that. They don't want to listen to you, and they think they're superior. I mean, a lot of Hollywood executives who've never written a thing in their life, and they treat screenwriters this way too, which kind of drives me fucking mad. But you know, they look at comic people down their nose a little bit, which is kind of weird since there's been so much success to comic book material. But the Hollywood people, they like to consider themselves superior in a way. So what happens is they'll be like, "Oh, hey kid, you did a good job with this comic. You know, we'll take it from here." You know, and fortunately, here's the thing where Mark Silvestri is smart, and I'm fortunate to be working with him, and we've been around long enough, and we're, you know, I don't want to use the word powerful because I don't think we're that powerful, but we just have the ability to tell people to go fuck off. And, you know, because our core business is publishing, and we're sort of immune. We don't necessarily need that licensing revenue from these other sources. It would be great, but there could have been, you know, it could have been multiple Witchblade movies made, and they would all have been bad. And one of the things that Mark and I talked about was that Talissa Soto Vampirella film. You know, it killed Vampirella for about 7 years before Barrucci fixed it at Dynamite and relaunched it. Everyone forgot about that crappy film, but Harris Publications, after that film came out, went out of business. You know, Dave Bogart, who's at Marvel, was one of the main guys at Harris. And I've talked to him about that before, and it's true. He said that when that movie came out, it destroyed a lot of their momentum in publishing.
Jeez. Yeah. I don't even remember that movie, honestly.
Yeah, me neither.
All I know Talissa Soto from is, what, License to Kill?
Oh, she's hot, and she looks good in it, but the movie's so bad that, you know, look it up. I'm sure it's on YouTube. There is a Vampirella movie by Talissa Soto. It's like that FF movie with the really bad one that came out before the two other bad ones.
The Roger Corman, yeah, and then the third bad one, the reboot bad one.
The harder question is, do you remember the good Fantastic Four movie? And no.
I don't. I
thought
don't hate them as much as some people.
That's it. There you go.
I like the Silver Surfer. There were some of the parts of the Silver Surfer one. I don't really remember it, but I remember some of that stuff visually being kind of fun.
Yeah, like the first time he shows up at the wedding and the Fantastic Four is like, what the fuck? And then, or the Human Torch is like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
That was about it.
Yeah. Now, Matt, something we ask everybody that comes on the show, what are you currently geeking out over?
Wow, what am I geeking out over? You know, I just watched Split, which I thought was fantastic.
Oh, it's so good.
I really, really like that. You know, I have two teenage boys, and I have a wife I spend most of my free time with, and we watch a lot of media. And, you know, I really like this Horizon Zero Dawn video game that just came out. I just beat it. And I only play about one, maybe two video games a year. It's about all I have time for. But I made the time for Horizon Zero Dawn. That's the funnest I've had playing a video game since I played Red Dead Redemption, you know. And Twilight Zone is on Netflix now, so I've been watching all the old 50s stuff. That's just great shit. I mean, the first season kind of sucks, but second and third seasons are fantastic.
What bums me out about the Twilight Zone on Netflix is they don't have the season where it's hour-long episodes. They only have the half-hour-long seasons. Whatever. I think seasons 1, 2, and 4.
Oh, that sucks. I'm in the middle of the second. I did not know that. I'm in the middle of the second season. I've been sort of binging it slowly over the last few weeks, but that really pisses me off. I'm very unhappy about that.
I'm sorry to burst your.
No, I did not know. So
there's always the outer limits.
If I remember correctly, it's more so due to like a rights issue with that one particular season.
It usually is kind of like how they for the longest time they only had the first 3 seasons of Alfred Hitchcock Presents, and then it just kind of stops, and you're like, well, what else did he present? This went on for years.
Right. Well, yeah, the other thing I've been kind of nerding out over recently actually is the dark web, because I've infiltrated it in the last month, and I never went on there until about 3 weeks ago. And I knew about it. I'd read about it intensely, but I finally broke down and downloaded the Tor client and created an account on Alphabay, and I've really been sort of perusing the dark web, just reading stuff, and it's amazing. It's scary, but I'm pretty smart about hacking stuff, so I'm kind of well protected. But I have learned so much crazy shit that it kind of spins my mind. And even the stuff about some of their paranoia that they talk about on their message boards down on the Alphabay message boards really was fun, because I started researching some of the stuff and discovered that it was true. You know, I had no idea. I discovered this yesterday, that the FBI now can take and use Wi-Fi to bounce through places, and they can pick up sound waves from Wi-Fi. So you could take 2 drones and position them on either side of a high-rise building and ping Wi-Fi between the 2 drones, and you could pick up any audible transmission inside of that building, and then have a computer translate it so you could record conversations at length. You don't need to wiretap shit anymore.
Damn.
You can just sort of do it. And that's stuff. And I read that on there where they were talking about that, like, be careful of this, that, or the other thing. And I'm like, what? And I started looking around and asked a few people I know, and there are things like that. And some of this, you know, if you remember 5 or 6 years ago, a lot of cybersecurity people were talking about how, you know, biometrics and biometric security things are really what's going to save, you know, in 2 and 3 tier authentication. And man, I got to tell you, that stuff is just useless. I mean, with 3D printing and stuff like this, like right now, there was a guy who just a few weeks ago took a photo off of the internet and 3D printed a face, and then was able to use that to fool a facial recognition scanner. And he pulled it off a fucking photo. And he was able to make a 3D model and print it on a 3D printer and fool a facial recognition scanner.
Fucking dark.
You know, and there's other things. Well, think about that.
It's like Mission
isn't that
Impossible. It's the
crazy?
pacemaker. Yeah.
Well, and it's legit now. I mean, that was bullshit until recently.
Yeah. Just like the sonar technology in the Dark Knight has become the sonar technology in the Dark Knight's real now. You can use, like you were saying, wireless devices, like you were saying, to ping things.
Well, not yeah. I mean, it's funny. I forgot about that. And I'm going to go back and watch. That was the second one, right? Dark Knight?
Yeah.
When he's like, when it's over, type in your name.
Yeah, the end of it. Yeah. No, damn. I have to go. I'm going to watch that tonight, right when we get off this, because I completely forgot about that. But yeah, no, it's just when you realize the technologies and probably the screenwriters, whether they figured that out or they read somewhere, you know, that this is what people are working on. Because that's what I do in Think Tank a lot, is I will look and read technologies that are, public domain, not public domain, but public. They're published now to where people know about them, and then I'll extrapolate in my head. Well, okay, this is 5 years old. Where would the technology be now? And that's a lot of what Think Tank is even though I include links and stuff like that, a lot of that is me kind of going in and trying to figure out where it could go. And I have to imagine I'm on every FBI Homeland Security watch list, because, I mean, I spent, just like a few months ago, I spent all day researching how to give people cancer, you know, and that was because I'm doing a book with Colleen Doran called The Clock, which is essentially a eugenics conspiracy thriller where a group figures out a way to give people cancer, and so they're going to thin the herd that way. So, and it's all, you know, I met with some immunotherapists and stuff, and really got sort of the inside skinny. And it's just, these are all different rabbit holes I love to go down and get obsessed with. And that's like Wildfire was GMO conspiracy thriller. That's one of my lesser known books, but I think it's great. You know, it's basically this group wants to accelerate plant growth to grow plants faster with less water and less pesticide and less food feed on top of it. So they figure out a way to do it, but biogenesis, which is my version of Monsanto, forces them to figure out a way to try to monetize it too fast and do some sort of a press conference. So the protein that grows the plants faster gets out, and they tested it on dandelions. So dandelions start spreading all over Los Angeles in insane fashion, which causes a fire, which wipes out most of Los Angeles. And then that fire is the catalyst, which causes a jump of the protein to higher plant species. So suddenly trees are growing out of control and growing through infrastructure, and you have a complete collapse of Los Angeles. It's kind of a GMO conspiracy disaster. It's the kind of storyline. It was fun. I've actually sold that one 3 times now as a film, and no one's made it yet. So there's a whole business of people that sell shit that never gets made. And I remember Jeff Loeb told me that he used to do that back in the 90s when I hung out with him. He would sell one screenplay a year. He would spec 3 or 4 screenplays, and he would sell one a year, but that would be enough money. That would be his income for the year.
He still makes that commando money too.
Yeah, that movie cracks me up. But he was Teen Wolf too. People forget about Jeff, but Jeff was Teen Wolf.
Teen Wolf.
Just the first one.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But oh my God, yeah.
That's crazy.
Does that mean he also gets like residual on the show too, or are those unrelated?
I don't know. I imagine it depends on a rights issue and who owns it. That really is, it depends on your contract. Like Rob Liefeld is making millions off of Deadpool now. And it's because he signed a good deal for himself. And I know that Marv Wolfman makes nothing off of Wolverine. So not Marv Wolfman, Len Wein. Yeah. Len Wein makes nothing off of Wolverine. You know what I mean? It was Dave McElhaney that drew it. I can't remember who drew it, but whoever the artist was, the 2 guys that created Wolverine, they basically get nothing for Wolverine. Okay, but Rob Liefeld's making millions off of Deadpool. So it's all about the deal, they talk about Siegel and Schuster and Superman versus Bob Kane on Batman, and it's just that one got a better deal.
Yeah, I do have to say, at the risk of getting my nose brown, Matt, I always did in a world full of weird science, because if you think about it, so much fucking comics is weird science. I always liked, yeah, just like the Oingo Boingo song. Yeah. No, I always liked how you grounded it. It always came from a plausible. Even again to touch on the political front, they always felt very well researched and well scarily plausible.
Well, everyone always has this theory about write what you know, and I sort of challenged that theory, where I wanted to write what I wanted to know, and then it made the research for me fun, and so a lot of stuff in Think Tank and in these other series that I do are areas that I was curious about that honestly I didn't know much about, and I might seem like an expert at it now, but it's because I spent hundreds of hours. And I'm obsessive about my research, where I will start emailing people and tweeting people and things like that. And it's amazing who will talk to you, because Kim Kardashian may have 10 million followers on Twitter, but some of these lead scientists in their field, they have 50 followers. And you look at the 50 followers, and it's fucking Bill Gates, and so you see these guys, and I'm like, so I've navigated. So a lot of times when I'll find these scientists, I'll look at who's following them, and that's how I discover new contacts. And they love talking to people. And a lot of these guys realize that entertainment and media is a great way to sort of clandestinely educate people about real science, which is why I do the stuff in the science classes in the back, because I actually want to show people that this stuff's real. That's one thing I hate about science fiction more than ever, and I think it's like a cop watching a cop show, is I cannot stand lazy writers in science fiction that they have a story that takes place in 2200 AD, but they're still using current technology, or they're using technology that is cutting edge right now, and stuff like that kind of drives me insane, because there's virtually no technology that we're using regularly from 200 years ago, so I can't imagine. And with the sort of the exponential growth of technology, especially over the last 35 years, the idea of 200 years from now just kind of boggles my mind, I have this theory, and it's what I went with Aphrodite 9 and that whole storyline, is that we're facing, as a species split. Where humans, Homo sapiens, will become 2 species, because you're going to have rich people that will have access to bio and genetic enhancements and biomimetics and epigenetics and technological and cybernetics that poor people won't be able to have. And so you're going to have the top 5% of people in the world that are going to live to be 300, 400, 500, 600 years old. And just imagine how much that's going to further disparate, the poor and the wealthy, because if you live that much longer, just the basic idea of compound interest, these people are going to own everything, and they're going to become, in a way, kind of demigods, and it's just nuts. And I think about that, and I'm kind of fascinated by all of it, because it's you look at healthcare now. I just dropped 10 grand, and I have insurance on 2 root canals, a new crown. And I have skin cancer on my eye, and it's fine. They removed it. But I just realized I have really good fucking health insurance, and I still cost me $10,000 out of my pocket. And I went on my Facebook about a month ago, and I said, how if you don't have 10 grand laying around, what do you do? And I was shocked at some of the responses of people like, you just do nothing. You just suffer. I'm like, what? And then one guy was like, yeah, I had several needs of root canals and stuff like that. I just had my teeth extracted. a dentist will extract your tooth for $50. Just pull it out. And I was like, and he showed a picture of his face, and I'm like, he had 4 or 5 teeth missing. I'm like, oh my God, and I'm just like, that's just crazy to me. And I feel fortunate that I can afford, to take care of myself. But, there is sort of this weird thing happening. And if, there's telomere length and mitochondrial decay and a lot of things that are happening right now with genetics research and epigenetics that I think you're going to see people that have access to certain medicines and technologies that are going to live vastly lengthier lives than those that don't. And it's already happening, and how's that going to affect us 50 or 100 years from now? Because, I always tell people about one of the reasons why I'm a fitness freak is because I've seen plenty of 80-year-olds that drink and smoke. I've never seen one 300-pound 80-year-old, because, heavy people die in their 60s and 70s. And if people want to eat and be fat, I don't care. More happy to them. But imagine sort of the compounded. And see, there's all kinds of these geopolitical and political problems because people always complain about heavy people and the cost of healthcare. It's actually not true because the heavy people, they die so much younger. They're not the ones that are clogging up the healthcare system at all. It's these people that live into their hundreds that have a lot of these long-term sort of problems that last for 20 or 30 years and require all these medicines. And some of these people are thin, and if you actually look and do the research, it's why I'm always amazed at what people think and what's real. They're completely different. Yeah. Sorry, rant over. Sorry.
Not nearly the worst political rant that we've had.
And honestly, this one's actually backed by facts.
Yeah.
As opposed to some of the other political rants we've had on the show. Which we won't name outright, but hey, check our vast back catalog.
Yeah, listen to all the episodes and try to figure out which ones we're talking about.
Yes.
That's how you get the numbers.
You should get Mike Miller. You should get Mike Miller and Ethan Van Sciver on. They'd be fun.
Oh man, yeah. Well, I mean, Matt. We've kept you for over an hour. Is there anything you want to plug before we let you back into the wild?
Well, definitely Samaritan. I think that's a fun story. I mean, it definitely is a book that is a sequel of several other things, but you don't have to read. I wrote this very specifically so that you can just read this. And sort of my hope and the way I've tried to write all these things is that you read it, you like it, it makes you want to read the other stuff, not that you feel like you have to. And we try to price the first trades, economically to get people to try them. But Samaritan for sure. Think Tank, for sure. I mean, I'm on Twitter, Top Cow Matt, my Facebook, Self-Loathing Narcissist. If you go into Facebook and you do Matt Hawkins, Top Cow, or Matt Hawkins, it's me and some South American rugby player. So
we came across that actually.
I'm not the giant blonde guy with tattoos everywhere. That's not me.
I'm
the guy that has comic book shit
guy.
This is a rugby podcast.
We call it Scrum Off.
Oh, I don't know anything about rugby. I know that there's a famous Matt Hawkins in South Africa, which is funny because I'll be in South Africa in 3 weeks, going to Cape Town to do a convention there. They're actually flying my wife and I down to do a comic book convention.
You should have a Crisis on Infinite Matt Hawkins. It'd be awesome.
Fun.
A hawk off, if I may.
But that is the nice part of being in the comic industry is Top Cow is kind of well seated, and our books are published in a lot of foreign countries. So I get invited to a lot of shows all over the world. I've been to Dubai, I've been to Japan, I've been to China and Korea, and definitely South Africa for the first time, but all throughout Europe. And they basically will fly you over. And I guess my star has risen enough to where now they fly my wife over too. So the two of us get flown over. We get a hotel for a few days, and then we just hang out for a few days in whatever country it is to check it out. It's pretty cool. It's a lot of fun.
How's the Chinese market been lately? I've seen that they've really exploded with their big 2 numbers.
It's the crazy thing about the Chinese market is you'll find your books being published over there without your knowledge, and that's what I've discovered more than anything. And I know that one of the reasons why C.B. Cebulski went over there to sort of ramp up the Marvel division is because piracy is so rampant over there that you'll find there are copies of Tomb Raider based on books that I edited or published back when we were doing Tomb Raider that have multiple editions from this Chinese company that were never licensed or authorized, and we never got paid for them. They just somehow tracked down the files, scanned them in, or did whatever they did, and just decided to print and publish these books. I mean, it's not even just the torrent version, which is it's another topic. But these are they took and physically printed new books and sold them and kept all the money. And it's weird. I have some of them, and they're books that I've written that I'm credited in as the writer. You know what I mean? Where they actually credit the people correctly.
I mean, yeah. At least you get the exposure, right?
Well, that's part of it, and which is good. And I have to say that some of the Chinese piracy of Top Cow titles is what led to my being able to sell Witchblade as that Japanese anime in 2004. Oh, okay. Because they were pirating Tomb Raider pretty heavily, and there was the crossovers with Tomb Raider and Witchblade, and that was where they had it had exposure to the Asian market. Huh. But no, anyway, I think Samaritan, Think Tank. I'm working on a book called The Clock with Colleen Doran. I'm doing Swing with Linda Sedgwick, which ties into the Sunstone world. I'm doing a new book called Stairway with Raphael Ianco, the guy I did Symmetry with. And Stairway is a fun title, and that one won't be out for another year, I would guess. I like to finish books before I publish them, whether it's direct market, Kickstarter, or whatever it is. It just they come out on time, and that's nice, Sure. And Stairway is fun because when I discovered that you could write on DNA, you could record information on DNA like a hard drive. When scientists discovered you could do that 2 years ago, it sort of got my mind spurning about, well, if you can actually record information on DNA, then what we used to call junk DNA when I was a kid might have some different meaning, really. And so what if you were able to decode that information, and what if in that information was millions of bits of information that were schematics and various information that were put there 10 million years ago? What would that mean? How would it affect religion? How would it affect our society? And what do those things do? How does that factor into what was thought of being as the gods and the demigods and stuff? So I started going down that rabbit hole and developed that out with Raphael. And so that's sort of a new sci-fi thing that he and I have been working on. And he's 60 pages into it, I think. So when we get to the 80 or 90 page point, I'll probably figure out how we're going to put that out. Sure. But those are, I think, most of the books I'm working on. Postal is continuing. I'm not writing that anymore. That's Brian Hill by himself and Isaac Goodhart, who is drawing it still. And I think that's kind of it.
And of course, Golgotha, the Kickstarter is going on now. We'll even though we usually put out episodes on a Wednesday, I think we're just going to put this up tomorrow because it's our show and we can do whatever the fuck we want.
That's right.
Cool. You guys have the power.
Yeah, ultimate power.
Yeah, definitely let me know. Email me the link, and I'll blast it out over all of Top Cow's social media. We usually get pretty good hits off of this stuff when we do that.
Sweet.
Woo! Yeah. Well, Matt, thanks again for coming on. And like I said, keep an eye out. Check out the Golgotha Kickstarter. Check out the new volume of Think Tank. And next month, keep an eye out for Samaritan. Fuck. I wrote a goddamn column about this.
You were going so well.
We got to start over now.
Yeah, I'm erasing the entire interview.
Yeah, we're starting over.
You are my good Samaritan. Thank you, sir.
Anyway, and cool. Matt, thanks again for coming on.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate you having me on. I had a good time.
Yeah, anytime.
This has been another Geek Out production. If you enjoyed what you heard, hey, we've got a special episode every Friday. Of course, there's the usual catching up show every Wednesday. And you get book club episodes just about every Tuesday these days. Thanks for listening.